Yeah. Go ahead.
You need an agenda, I have a couple more. Anybody? Yeah. Jim, you got one?
I'm all set. Thank you, Val.
Okay, ready.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Town of Dayton Soil Conservation Board meeting. Monday, November 28th. It is 5:40 p.m. This agenda is subject to revisions, additions prior to the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. The listing of matters are those reasonably anticipated by the chair, which may be discussed at the meeting. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by law. Could we have the call to order?
Peter Karen here.
Mr. Karen,
Campuchico present.
present. Also present is from the Conservation Commission,
Charles Mello.
Charles Mello,
Tom Perry.
Tom Ferry, Highway Department.
James Aguirre, Building Commissioner and Agent for the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. Could we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and
To the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. On the agenda this evening is review, discuss, and act on a request for soil removal permit for 508 Customs of 1940 County Street, Dayton, Mass. 02715. Mr. Mullen, I don't see the applicant present here this evening. So could you explain
What?
the purpose?
Yes, so the applicant has the application. And he was provided the application, I believe, last week. I was anticipating that we would have the application, but there are some things like with the bylaw and with the regulations that we wanted to discuss regardless, even though we don't yet have the application. So that when we do receive the application, and there's a pretty there's a process that will be triggered. Once the application is filed, we just want to make sure we're number one, on the same page about how we're proceeding, but number two, we do understand that there have been concerns raised by the Concom, and we want to make sure that we're addressing the concerns, especially of those that have been brought to our attention from the conservation agent, about the dirt. And there is a timing piece there that we wanted to discuss as well.
Do you have a report from the conservation agent in regards to specifically what her concerns were?
Yes, there is the pile of soil that has been altered and that's piled is actually in a wetland, and
Close to a wetland. Not
The
in
buffer
wetland.
zone, the wetland.
Right.
yes, I'm sorry, so yes. In the buffer zone, and her concern is that with every day that goes by, the pile has the ability, I believe, to affect the buffer zone and potentially the wetland as well.
Mr. Mello, as a representative of the Conservation Commission, could you fill us in any specifics that may help us in our
This is
decision?
within the buffer zone of wetland, and the wetland is within 100 feet of a buffer zone. But I did notice driving by back and forth, I don't see a pile of dirt anymore.
That may be. I haven't been down there today. Oh, it's not,
disappeared.
so it's not a problem for conservation anymore. That's great. So
I,
So I can put a little context into this. So I brought up at the last PAC meeting, which we meet, for those who don't, it's a permitting and compliance team. We meet at least once a month, sometimes more. At the last PAC meeting, I was visited by Derek Hanoud, who's the owner of the property, 508 Customs, that he was having a problem with his neighbor. And the neighbor had threatened to block off access to Mr. Hanoud's property. They have a shared driveway. Unfortunately, most of the driveway is owned by the neighbor and not Mr. Hanoud. And he wanted to know what he needed to do in order to increase the size of the parking area and create a new access to the property. So I brought it up to the permanent compliance team. It just so happened to fall almost perfectly. We had a meeting scheduled, brought it up. I went out there with Mrs. Caledonia for a site visit to check precisely for this. And at the time, she didn't have a concern with what was proposed to be done. I then told Derek that there was a process we needed to follow. There was a couple of permits that we needed to obtain. And we would see it through. It was either a day or two later, Mr. Hanoud called me and said, I've got an issue. He's going to put a Jersey barrier there. He's going to stop access from my clients getting their stuff in and out, stores items there, boats, motorhomes, things like that. So I thought it would be in the best interest of the town to allow him to do everything simultaneously, because if we had stopped the project to get the permits done and the barrier was put up, nobody would be able to get their stuff out. And I was concerned that we would be, although not solely liable, somewhat liable, if everything was held up in permitting and we couldn't get those things out because they would have to drive over grass to do it. Then I thought it would be best to work with the property owner, work with the business, and do everything simultaneously. Since then, Mrs. Caledonia revisited the site and determined that the original walkthrough that we did was inaccurate and that the pile was actually within the buffer zone of wetlands that were not on Mr. Hanoud's property, but on the adjacent property, also the abutter. So the wetlands are not on his property or on the abutting property. We would concur with this. Mrs. Caledonia was a little concerned that the dirt was there, and as Administrator Mullins said, she was concerned about silt runoff within the buffer zone, and that it would be wise to get the dirt out there as soon as possible. I told her, unfortunately, this body needed to meet in order to make that happen. And now in the interim, I guess pressure from Mrs. Caledonia, the dirt has now been moved. What I would like to do though, and I understand that maybe the process should have happened a little differently, but I think the town as a whole, especially me, particularly, would try to work with the property owner and the applicant to make sure whatever permits were needed were obtained. However, we also don't want to obstruct a property owner or in a case like this where an abutter was in control of their access, that we would then interfere and not allow people to get their stuff out. So in a perfect world, it would have gone differently. Unfortunately, here we are. The owner has now retained an engineering firm to prepare a site plan for the planning board, special site plan review, and the curb cut that's required from the state of Massachusetts, because Mr. Ferry doesn't have jurisdiction over curb cuts on Route 138. So he's retained an engineer, they're preparing those plans. I've talked to the chairman of the planning board, he's fine allowing that to run concurrently. And in the meantime, they're aware that some work has been done. Why I asked this body to convene was twofold. At first glance, I would say that a soil removal pit was applicable. However, I've delved into this bylaw more than I ever thought I would in the past couple of days, a week. And I've seen some inconsistencies in the language in the bylaw. So I would first, before we haul Mr. Hanoud in for a public hearing, have this body either start the discussions or have discussions, because I know we have another meeting at 6 o'clock.
6:30 now.
6:30, I'm sorry. So maybe we will be able to discuss this with the approval of the chairman. I would like to really know, as the agent for the Board of Selectmen who has to enforce these things, what was the intent of this bylaw? Because I see conflicting language in Article 10, which is the actual bylaw. And then the regulation, which goes on to further define some of the processes where the language is all over the place. There's no consistency in any of it. So I really want to know, can we memorialize through this committee what you would like me to enforce as an agent for the Board of Selectmen?
Mr. Mullin,
Yes.
I have a number of concerns, and I'll start with the first one. The Soil Conservation Commission, besides the 3 members of the Board of Selectmen, who else is a member of this board? One representative of the conservation, or is it supposed to be all of the members of the Conservation Commission?
One representative.
Just one representative?
Yes.
We really don't have any action because we don't have an application in front of us. Thirdly, I think all of us here have an understanding of what hearsay is. We have concerns of supposed conservation issues. Oh, Mike, you're a little early.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, it'll be about 6:15.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. We have alleged concerns of conservation, yet I don't have anything in writing. I don't know what the specifics are. I do know from what you have said that we have a business owner that has a problem. And I know dirt has been removed. Where did the dirt go?
I don't know. I just found out that it's not there. So I'll follow up on that.
But it wasn't on his property, though, right?
I'm sorry,
It wasn't on his property, it was on
the dirt
the dirt.
filed on this property.
The wetlands are not on this property.
The wetlands was
Not
not
on
on
it.
so I'm sorry. The dirt was filed on Mr. Hanu's property.
Within the 100.
Right.
So I see if we could, because of time, 2 issues. One, how we're going to work with this business owner to help resolve a problem in an amicable way to the best of our ability, because my understanding is there's a conflict with a neighbor that might and get legal. The second issue is to take a look at the bylaw and to see if it's sound or if we need to make changes.
The reason why I'm asking for input from this committee on the bylaw is because I feel that there may be some issues with having this applicant come in if there are inconsistencies within the bylaw and the regulation. So as the enforcement official acting on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I need some clear, concise direction to make sure that the implementation of this bylaw, whatever that may be, is done in consistency with what its intent was. I feel after reading this, maybe, some activities either should have had a permit who didn't, and there may be some activities who obtained a permit that shouldn't have had a permit. So I understand that it's not on the agenda specifically. However, I think it's applicable in the fact that if you want me to go out and ask Mr. Hanoud from Five Way Customs to apply and have a public hearing, then I would like to know what this body's feeling is on the applicability of Article 10, not just to Mr. Hanoud, but any other activity that's similar to that.
I'm going to hold my opinion for a minute. Mr. Pacheco, any questions?
Well, as you know, we had a meeting a few years ago, and happens to be this neighbor who had an issue with it. And that- It's my understanding at that meeting, and Mrs. Goulart was present, she was a member of the board at that time. That was the first time, my understanding was that anybody ever had to come before the Soil Conservation Committee, to get a permit to
Correct.
remove, and he had actually removed soil already out of
Correct.
town. And
Correct.
so I'm not a big fan of this bylaw. However, we don't have that application in front of us. I think we have to deal with it because this is the current bylaw. I'd be interested to know what your concerns about the bylaw.
Okay.
Mr.
No, I'd rather hear his concerns as well.
So-
Thank you.
Will you do?
Yes.
Just
Yes.
what I'd like to take two separate, if we could. And the first one, and I've heard some people. I would entertain a motion to request the Agia work with this business owner to help resolve this issue. Now, that may mean you're going to see concerns as an enforcement officer. You could bring those to whatever board they need to be brought. Help him through the permitting process. But to walk this man through and let us know what's going on. So I would entertain a motion to appoint Building Commissioner James Aguirre to meet. Would it be just with Mr. Hanoud?
Yeah, he's the only one. If this bylaw applies to him, then he's the only one who has activity that is consistent with being a permit.
I see it more than just dealing with the bylaw. I see there are a number of issues that have been thrown out there, nothing formally. One, from what I've heard, he wasn't certain of the permitting process himself. And if you could help walk him through that. I know I'm talking to planning board officials, they were concerned that he should go to them. I've heard some concerns from conservation that he should go to them. Could you help walk him through the process, and would the Board of Selectmen to appoint Mr. Aguirre to handle that?
My only concern is that this is the Soil Conservation Committee. Why are we
Well, it's a
talking about the
joint,
planning board? And no, I understand these other members, but we're only concerned about him removing the gravel. If he has a problem with conservation, conservation is going to deal with it. If he has a problem with planning board.
It's no longer there, so there's no problem.
Right,
I
so
have a question.
Yeah.
How he bought the business that was Tony Rodriguez?
He bought
The
the building.
storage area is his,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
I mean, all those buildings are within the buffer zone. This is further away from the wetland than the buildings themselves
Right,
or the storage area.
right.
There wasn't a lot of problem with silt runoff because the grading is not that bad.
Right. Well, I met with your agent
Yes,
after the PAC meeting at the location, and she didn't have a concern with it then, but she has a concern with it now. I don't know how to explain that, but she did.
well,
So,
there's a possibility that heavy rainstorm could wash siltation down into that little brook in the wetland area.
okay,
And it's an intermittent stream, it's not a perennial stream, so. But
So-
it seems like they solved the problem because I don't see a pile of dirt there. I saw a pile of dirt there 2 weeks ago. It's not there today.
okay. I'll find out what it tomorrow. So, I think I can probably answer your question without a motion. I am the only appointed agent for the Board of Selectmen. There's no other. That means I am the one who has to act on behalf of the Board of Selectmen. So if that's what you're asking, I've already assumed that position. I've already started that process. So yes, I will work with Mr. Hanoud.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ken, what don't you like about the bylaw?
I didn't say,
No.
Oh, I
not the
thought you had said earlier
No,
that you didn't agree with it.
no, Jim said that he didn't, has some concerns about it, so I'm not. a
Oh,
fan
okay.
of The bylaw,
Right, why, I guess?
like, I don't know why the Board of Selectmen's on this, so,
Oh, is that,
that's
Okay.
one of my main concerns, but, and there's been talk about getting rid of this bylaw completely.
yep, okay.
That has never been brought up before the residents.
Any questions?
No, that was it, thank you.
Mr. Aguirre, on the issue of removal of soil, loam, sand and gravel, the bylaw specifically, could you explain your concerns?
Sure. So in Article 10 specifically, it prefaces by saying the removal of sand, gravel, loam, or soil from land in Dayton is prohibited until a permit authorizing such removal is issued by the appropriate authority. Seems pretty cut and dry, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Yet, in that same section, Article 10 said, Soil Conservation Board shall have the authority to establish general rules and regulations and set fees for the mining and removal of sand, gravel, soil, or loam in the town of Dayton, and shall have the authority to place specific conditions on all removal permits that it issues. Now, the reason I have a problem with the way that's worded, or I have an opinion on the way that's worded, is anytime you use the word "and" in a regulation, bylaw, or code, you have to link the two. So in my opinion, the removal of sand, gravel, soil, or loam is in direct result from the mining operation. Because the word "and" links mining and the rest of it together. So that's my first problem. And it sort of goes in hand with what Selectman Pacheco said, that a couple of years ago was the first permit that we issued, because we haven't had any mining operations. So there's no need for this permit to be issued because we haven't had any mining operations.
My understanding was that there were some things that happened that led to the creation of this bylaw by previous.
Okay, and I'm not aware of that. So that's what I would like this body to discuss, so that you can tell me what was the intent. And there are some issues in the regulation that contradict one another that maybe we need to look at cleaning up. And this body has the ability to alter the regulations. It's right in Article 10. So my opinion, the way I read this is that Article 10, which is the bylaw, is the governance language, specifically links mining and the removal of sand and gravel. Therefore, in my opinion, professionally, the removal of sand, gravel, soil, and loam is only required to be permitted when it's associated with mining.
Right.
That's it. That means the permit that was issued a couple of years ago should not have been issued, and this permit would not be applicable because this is not a mining operation.
Right.
Now, if you go into the regulations, regulations seem to have predicted Article 10 because there's language in here that now says that it's more broader in theory. So I think there was a loss between the regulation right opposition by this commission, by this board, previous members, whoever, and the original intent of Article 10. So now, as an enforcement authority, I can't enforce a regulation that contradicts with the bylaw. It's not legally possible. So that's the concern. Whether the intent of this bylaw was to do things other than mining, what failed to happen was Article 10 was failed to change to include other operations other than mining.
Are you aware? I hear what you're saying about this. But Mr. Ferry's been around Dayton longer than I have. You are aware of the pit in the back of Council Oakaway
Yes. Yes.
and how that
But that
came
was,
about before this bylaw.
but that was a mining
That
operation.
was a mining operation.
That was a mining operation. I feel that Dayton should have some control over mining operations. I completely agree with that. Because if you look at the language in the regulation, it goes on to talk about hours of operation, routes for trucking, putting soils back to make sure they're stabilized, not digging into the groundwater, making sure that there's trap rock so that we're not dragging things out into the roadway. I completely agree with all of that. But for a mining operation, not for someone who's going to remove 40 yards of material out of a property. Because if that's the case, you know how many of these permits we should have issued through the years? Hundreds of permits. That wasn't the intent of this bylaw. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, because I'm trying to get to the bottom.
So, yes, the town, if I may, the town had Gay interpret that, and I'm sure you had these letters from 06 and 07 to help clarify that, especially the difference between zoning and planning, those type of operations. Regulations currently say the regulations for mining or removal of gravel, loam, or soil or loam in the town of Dayton.
The regulations. says that.
Correct.
But the bylaw never was changed.
Right. Two different letters there.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, the last time we did a permitting process, that should have been part of your packet for review.
Oh, don't we read this into the record really quick, just
Certainly.
so it's
Certainly,
so this letter is dated September 27, 2006. Dear Selectmen, in response to your memo of September 25th, 2006, and to confirm our previous discussions, Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 21, Clause 17 enables the city or town to enact a bylaw or ordinance, but regulating the removal of soil, loam, and sand and gravel from land not in public use. The statute provides the authority for the town to adopt bylaws, specifically Article 10 of the town bylaws entitled Removal of Soil, Loam, Sand, and Gravel. However, the bylaw adopted by the town is subject to the limiting language contained in Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 21, Clause 17. The last sentence in that clause states any bylaw prohibiting such removal hereunder shall not apply to any soil, loam, sand, or gravel, which is to be removed in compliance with requirements of a subdivision plan approved by the town planning board. It is therefore clear that the planning board rules and regulations authorizing the removal of soil, loam, and sand and gravel as part of a construction of a subdivision does not require a separate earth removal permit from the town. Clearly, the removal of soil, loam, sand, and gravel must be part of the subdivision construction and not used as a front for the removal of soil, loam, sand, and gravel without an earth removal permit. The portion of the bylaw that requires the earth removal operations to maintain the soil within the town limits would apply to both removal under a soil permit and to removal under a subdivision control permit. In view of this, it appears that the zone property clearly is exempt from the soil bylaw application. The project being undertaken by Aquaria may not be so exempt. I do not believe Aquaria is operating under a subdivision approval plan. If the operation is under a plan approved by the planning board as a subdivision, then they are exempt. If not, then they are, then they are not exempt and must earth removal operations under pursuant to Article 10 of the town bylaws. That's one. A follow-up letter dated about a year later, July 3rd, 2007. Dear Selectmen, per your request, we are in the process of completing a preliminary draft of the earth removal bylaw for the town. So this must relate to a proposed bylaw amendment because the underlying bylaw was approved, I believe, in 1986.
Yes.
No. It's been amended since then. This is the following page after you read that letter.
Well, this is the current bylaw.
I think it's 2017.
No, it's 86.
Regulations may have been amended, but
Yeah, regulation.
So yeah, so based on this, whatever this is, this relates to a draft of a proposed bylaw, which was never adopted. So I don't even think it comes into question because it's about a hypothetical, how that never happened.
so is the problem with the bylaw or with the regulations?
Well, the bylaw as written, in my opinion, only applies to mining operations. However, Attorney Gay's letter, although in some parts agrees with me, it doesn't. It actually includes other projects or could include other projects. The problem with the regulations, though, is the regulation, although the bulk of it means to mining, there are some other sections in there that apply to other areas.
Regulations are easier to change than bylaws.
This body can change the regulation,
Correct.
right?
I think you want to keep it that way.
Yeah, we don't want it to go any other. That's the reason this body was created. Whether or not the three BOS need to be on it is another discussion. But right now, that's the way it's written. So that raises another question. Now that I know about Attorney Gay and Gates. If the planning board is part of the process and they issue a permit for a project. I know that it says subdivision control bylaw, but they also issue special permits for site plan review. So if the planning board has an act and issues a site plan approval, does that also mean it negates them from applicability of this bylaw? I'm sure it didn't come up just because it wasn't asked of Attorney Gay and Gay. So if you have a site plan process that goes through planning board and it's approved, similar to the language that Gay and Gage said about subdivision control bylaw, which also goes to the planning board to be approved, does that also negate the applicability of this bylaw?
I think we need clarification on that from the attorney.
Yeah. To me, it would. It's still an action of the planning board, goes through a planning board hearing process.
Right.
So I guess that the concerns that I have are twofold. One is I don't want to apply rules and regulations to someone who it doesn't pertain to. But more importantly, if this body feels that it does pertain to the action on the table right now, which is on the agenda, then there are a lot of actions that this body should take in the past.
And I don't see a formal complaint presented this evening.
Right.
I hear some hearsay.
Right, and we're trying to intervene in a civil suit between the two.
We are, but I'll have this body know that I'm also making sure Mr. Hanoud gets his site plan review from the planning board and his curb cut from the state permitting authority, which is District 5 through Mass Highway Department, sorry. DOT, Mass DOT, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. So I am actively working for compliance on those two items, and I have had email correspondence with the chairman of the planning board, who's well aware and has issued his blessing to work with the applicant to just make sure that they get in front of the planning board.
And you'll see that the appropriate board is addressed if there is a need.
I will, I am and I will, yes.
Thank you. Would it be,
Bylaw was originally passed, it had a chairman and it had commission members. Conservation Commission wasn't a member then.
oh,
It had its own board. No,
That was probably in 64,
that was original.
yeah.
So in terms of the composition. Yeah, like, I think to Mr. Mello's point, the bylaw itself. In terms of the composition, this bylaw is to be administered and managed by a committee of soil conservation board consisting of the 3 selectmen and 4 appointees to be appointed by the selectmen on a yearly basis. So the fact.
It's in the bylaw.
okay.
That's in Article 10.
Yeah, so it's actually the discretion of the selectmen, and I think. I'm biased, but the 3 gentlemen here, here for good reason. Oh, that this. Yeah, like that, I mean, just by happenstance, there was no. Nothing in the bylaw telling,
Outside of the bylaw.
Yeah.
No trigger to remind these people, any of us, to meet in January.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
doesn't, and it doesn't even go a step further
Yeah.
than they to convene as a committee either.
So the
Yeah.
Board of Selectmen hasn't appointed 4 members.
Yes.
you've appointed 3 out of. 3 out of the additional 4, you appointed,
Mr. Mello.
yep,
Mr. Ferry.
yep, and Jim,
So we're one short,
1 short.
one vacancy.
I'm sure.
Okay.
So I don't want to beat this up. We have another meeting we have to go to. So is the action that Mr. Hanoud did, should it come to this board?
At this point in time, based on no formal complaint, no.
Okay.
So and then the other thing, just to do our due diligence, like as Ken mentioned as well, we understand that Mr. Hanoud is going before the planning board for a special permit.
Right.
If we can confirm based on that letter, that like a special permit is treated the same way by the planning board as a subdivision. But then really everything here is not applicable.
And it makes sense to me that the intent of this was for an operation that didn't fall under the jurisdiction of another body within this town. Particularly the planning board.
No, thank you.
And I think that would be, it would be appropriate for this board to have oversight and issue a permit, because no one else is,
Right.
no other triggering event.
What is going to plan board for? It's not
Site-
building, it's a site plan
Site
review,
plan for the parking,
major
yes.
or minor.
Minor, I believe, but we haven't seen a plan yet,
Right.
so.
Okay,
Thank
keeping,
you.
expediting things.
All right, thank you for coming tonight.
Oh, you're
Short
welcome.
notice, I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Two things. One, we clean this up in regards, not the specific incident, but the bylaw issue and the vacancy issue.
Yes, but I think the regulations may need more attention.
That's what I'm talking about, not the bylaw.
Yes.
Because the bylaw requires a town vote. Regarding regulations, could we take this under advisement, review it, put together some questions, and have another meeting at some point in time?
Bylaw says you want to have a meeting in January.
Right.
anyways.
I was gonna suggest that bylaw says
Okay.
we're supposed to meet in January.
And that'll be our homework, is to review this, bring up questions so that we can maybe in the January meeting, clean it up. Take, needs to be taken out. Yeah. In the meantime, could we post the position? The vacancy to give? What member?
First Wednesday of January.
The first Wednesday in January? Do you know what date that is?
I think it's the second or third.
Yeah,
It is the
Fourth.
fourth, I'm sorry, the fourth.
So. Could I have a motion to schedule our next meeting for January 4th, 2023 at what time? 6 p.m., 6:30, 7?
I'll make a motion that we had a scheduled meeting on January 4th at what time?
That was,
We have to go by
yeah,
Mr. Karen's schedule.
yeah,
Yep.
he's checking now.
It was a Monday.
You want to do it on a Monday?
No, I.
No, it's Wednesday.
yeah, we're
Wednesday.
probably by Wednesday.
According to the regular bylaw,
On the
right?
first
By
one.
the bylaw,
Yeah, if we can do 6, that would be great.
at 6 p.m.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion made in second. All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
very much.
And then the main thing on the agenda will be to review the regulations.
Right.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
Second.
Motion made in second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.